Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Kidlit Social. I'm Laura Backus, and I'm coming to you today from New Orleans. Well, the next two or three socials, well, we're here for 6 weeks, so that's three socials. You will see this background, and I'm perched precariously on a stool and hope I don't fall over during the conversation. Yeah, we're in New Orleans. And hopefully I will not get bigger and bigger as I go through these socials from all the amazing food in this town. It's just incredible. So let's get going here. For those of you who are new to us, first of all, welcome to the Kidlit Social. And we are celebrating our 32nd year in business, Children's Book Insider, which is pretty amazing, I think. Patting ourselves on the back for that. Our flagship product is our newsletter, Children's Book Insider. It's a monthly newsletter, comes out obviously once a month, direct to your inbox, about 20 pages a month. And if you want to subscribe, we have a special deal for our socialites, $5 a month, rightforkids.org/CBI. And in the newsletter, you will get a special above the slush pile submission opportunity for either an agent or an editor every month. And actually this month in January of 2022, we have 2 editors. And I changed the process this month where you fill out your query letter online on a special form I've created. I collect them all at the end of the month and send them all at once to the editor so that they're not getting 500 emails in their inbox. And then they will contact you if they want to see more of your manuscript. So, rightforkids.org/CBI. And now we get to celebrate. I have some good ones this week. I've got to pull this down. So, Mary Blackwell's debut middle grade novel, The Worry Knot, releases today, January 18th, from Immortal Works Press. It's the story of an anxious 12-year-old boy struggling to cope with his worries and responsibilities as he navigates a roller coaster year in middle school. So congratulations, Mary. That's awesome, and happy book birthday to you. Deborah Doherty writes, in December, my nonfiction short story, Rachel, about a ghost child who haunts Springfield High School, was published in Offbeat Reads anthology Adventures on the Go Book 2. That's great, Deborah. Congratulations on that. And I love short stories. I think it's awesome that there is a market for short stories for kids. That's great. And Sheila Herrera recently signed to be represented by Annalise Cervantes of the Harvey Klinger Literary Agency. So way to go, Sheila. You got an agent, and we hope to hear very soon about a publishing deal, and we will help celebrate that with you. So congratulations to everybody on those great accomplishments this month. So I want to hear your good news. You can email me at mail@rightforkids.org and put celebrate in the subject line, and we will feature your news on a future Kidlit social. And no celebration is too small. It does not have to be a publishing credit or, a book out. It can be you found your perfect critique partner. That is something to celebrate. We want to help celebrate every part of the journey with you. And here's a good link of interest for you this month. We were just talking about submission opportunities. Vagueness Kills a Query by Nathan Bransford on his blog. And he was actually a guest on the social a few months ago. He's a former agent, and he is also a published author, and he does freelance editing, and he's got a great blog. But anyway, this particular blog post examines how using a few specific details of your plot in your query is more compelling than using broad generalizations, and it actually helps sell the book, or the manuscript rather. It makes the editor or agent want to read your manuscript when you give them more specifics instead of big general plot points. So read this article. Here's a direct link, bit.ly/vague query. Now I get to introduce my amazing guest for tonight. Alda Dobbs was born in a small town in northern Mexico, but moved to San Antonio, Texas as a child. She studied physics and worked as an engineer before pursuing her love of storytelling. Her debut middle grade novel, The Barefoot Dreams of Petraluna, came out this past September from Sourcebooks, and it's received starred reviews in Publishers Weekly and Booklist, was named a New York Public Library Book of the Year, and was recently nominated for the Texas Bluebonnet Master List Award. So that's very impressive for a debut. The sequel, The Other Side of the River, comes out next September. Alda is available to present at schools in English or Spanish. And in her presentation, she talks about the research behind Barefoot Dreams, her family story, and encourages young readers to seek their own stories, which I love. So Alda, welcome to the Kidlit Social.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited, and I want to thank everybody that's watching tonight as well. I'm really excited to have everybody here.
Yes, and we have a big crowd who watches on the replay. So you will be talking to way more people as well, which is really exciting. So thanks so much for being here. This is great. So Barefoot Dreams of Petraluna, for those who haven't read your book, was inspired by your great-grandmother's story of escaping her burning Mexican village when she was 9 years old in 1913. And during the Mexican Revolution, making her way across the desert with what it was her father, 2 siblings and 2 cousins, right?
That's correct.
And then they got to the US border, and they were denied entry into the United States, along with what you thought was hundreds, but when you did research, you realized it was thousands of refugees, right, who were being denied entry at the same point. Mm-hmm. So you heard this family story your whole life.
Yes.
It's part of your history. What inspired you to finally turn it into a book?
That's interesting, because when I started writing, I started out with an anthropomorphic book. And I was learning how to write. This was about 12 years ago. You know, going to workshops, conferences. I signed up for your newsletter, which helped tremendously. I'm always very grateful for Children's Book Insider. Mm-hmm. And did a bunch of stuff to learn the craft. And but I knew I was still learning how to write. And even though I submitted my then novel to publishers and editors, agents, and they said they rejected me. You know, obviously I was still learning. And at that point I said, you know what, I'm going to start writing children's articles for magazines. See if I could get my practice there. And I published one with Highlights magazine, and I thought about writing another one. And that's when this family story, came to mind. So it started as a magazine article, but as I'm typing it, I said, you know what, I don't even know if this is true. You know, I heard this story so many times, but is it true? I don't want to write something thinking it's true and it's not. So that's when I said, okay, I'm going to do the research. And it took about a year, because I couldn't find it in books. You know, it took forever I read every book on the Mexican Revolution. And it frustrated me that 40 books in English and Spanish, academic books, didn't have anything about that bridge, that last climatic scene. And I was about to give up, and it was a librarian in Colorado who motivated me and encouraged me and said, don't give up. You know, there's so many other resources you could use. And one of them, I was able to access newspapers that were published ages ago, decades ago, and thus started another research process. And after 7 months, I came across that headline article that had my family story, exactly the way my great-grandmother had described everything to the T. And like you said, I had been told it was hundreds of people trying to cross that bridge, and it was thousands. It was 7,000 people. So at that point I said, you know what, I have to share this story beyond a magazine article. It's got to be known because it's something that
Mhm.
not only affected my family, but these thousands of people, plus the million plus people that migrated during the Mexican Revolution that faced similar circumstances. And
Mhm.
that's when I decided to write it turned into a picture book at first. It wasn't even a novel. And it was a
Hmm.
small picture book. And of course, it was a 1,500 word picture book because I didn't know what I was doing. And took it to agents, and they kept saying it's too long, doesn't sing right, I don't like it. And finally, one agent said she really liked it, but she thought it was a novel. She thought it was a chapter from a novel. And I said, no, it's a
Hmm.
picture book. And she said, no, you have to turn this into a novel. So I want to find out what happens to the character prior, afterwards, turn this into a novel. So that's when the idea for the novel started. And that took me
Wow.
another 3 years to do the research and write the novel out.
So, how did that feel when, first of all, I think the agent was right. That was really good advice. But how did that feel for you? You thought you'd finished your manuscript, and suddenly you're thinking, I have to write another 35,000 words or whatever. Um, were you excited by the challenge, or were you overwhelmed?
Both. I was really excited because I said, oh my goodness, because all these ideas, other stories that
Mhm.
I had heard, I'm like, oh, I could add this, I could add that, and research this. But then once I started opening books and thinking, okay, how did they live? The details. That's when it started getting daunting. I said, okay, now
Mhm.
I really have to delve into this research and really immerse myself in that world and pretend that I'm living there just so that I could write the story. So it
Mhm.
was a little overwhelming at first, but I did have that passion and that fire, so that's what kept me going.
Mhm. So, speaking of research, you said you wanted to make sure that this was a true story, so you did that research, which is great. And it is mind-boggling that you had to work so hard to verify this was true, seeing as how many people were involved in
Mhm.
this incident and in this whole, like you said, 7,000 people, and yet it was so hard for you to verify, but that's another conversation. Um, but when writing any kind of historical fiction, you have to research the time period, what it was like, the daily life of the people then, the location. And even though you had been hearing these stories from your family, you were also starting from scratch, like any other writer would be.
Yes.
So how extensively, how long did it take you to get enough research where you felt comfortable saying, okay, now I can write the story?
Well, I did the research and I would start writing. I would write scenes. And if I
Mhm.
had questions, I just wrote through the scene. And later on, I would say, for instance, when they're in the desert, I knew they had to eat, but I told myself, okay, I have no idea what they were eating then.
Yeah.
So, and I was trying to recall what stories I heard about eating and food, but I couldn't remember the names of the plants or what they ate
Mhm.
out in the desert. So I contacted my mom, and my mom knew an old great aunt that I had that was still living, thank goodness, in a different
Wow.
town, and we made a trip. And I was able to talk to her, and she recalled her mother, which is my great grandmother, telling her what they used to eat, and I was just jotting down everything. So to me, I felt so blessed that she was alive, and I was able to
Yeah.
get those stories from her. And I also did a lot of research on memoirs, people that wrote memoirs from there's a lot of works of anthropology that I was lucky to find. And these anthropologists interviewed people, historians and anthropologists interviewed people who had survived the Mexican Revolution. And a lot of the stories, the details were about what they ate. So some of the things coincided with what my great aunt said, and other things I learned. So
Hmm.
it's details, you're just digging, you're mining for all these gems, and hopefully, at the end you'll have enough to put in the story, or you might have more than enough, but you don't want to add, and bog down the story. You want to stay true to the story, but just include enough details that move the story forward.
Well, and that's always the challenge, I think, when writing historical fiction. You've done all this research and you have all these fascinating details and you want to use them all, but the person, the protagonist, is living in that era, so they are not necessarily going to remark on all the things that you find remarkable as
Mhm.
someone from today looking back. And you have to keep that in mind, like the clothes they wear,
Exactly.
it's just their clothes. It's just, or how they get from point A to point B, whether it's a horse or a carriage or whatever. That's just what they do. It's
Mhm.
not novel to them. And so to remark on it pulls the reader out of the story. And so it is quite a balancing act. Yeah.
Yes, and not only that, but when it helps you do a lot of research, and even though a lot of the details don't go into the story, you're trying to get the confidence. You're trying to get the confidence to tell the story, and the only way is to really be immersed in that world. You have to feel that you're part of it. And a lot of
Mhm.
times, with the photographs and that I saw from the past, I saw them so many times and studied them, cross-referenced with maps and newspaper pictures and history books, to the point that I recognize the city more back then than I did now.
Ah,
But that's just how, immersed you are. And
sure.
once you feel immersed, you're able to tell the story with confidence because you're there. You're walking the streets, you're looking at the buildings, you're looking at the people, and they're
Mhm.
interacting the way you have researched them, as
Right,
the
right,
dialogue and their food and everything else.
right. So that's interesting, that confidence. I bet that's sort of a signal to you, I've got enough research, unless there's some little thing that comes up you have to find, but
Exactly.
you get the feeling like I can walk the street as my character and feel comfortable that I know where I'm going. And so that's kind of a good, yeah, I like that. I like that. So the characters, it's historical fiction, and the characters in the book are essentially fictional, though they are sometimes based on or inspired by your family members. So, why did you fictionalize to that point? Why didn't you use your actual great grandmother in the book
I think as I was
rather
trying
than
to
fictionalize it?
Yeah, I was trying to write a certain book, and I was trying to write a middle grade book, and my great grandmother was 9 years old to begin with, so they would have been too young for a middle grade book, and I figured 12 is about the right age for that type of story. And
Mm-hmm.
not only that, but it raised the stakes too when she's that age. So certain situations, circumstances, people had to change in order to
Sure.
add to the struggles of the character for the book. So that's why it was inspired by my great grandmother's events, but based on fiction, because a lot of stuff was dramatized, and some scenes were even taken from not necessarily my great grandmother but my grandmother, because both of them were very poor. So a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
stories came from both women, and
Mm-hmm.
I was able to supplement certain things, and then just have fiction walk into the story, and then another experience. So it was a mesh. It was a weave of different real life and fiction
Mm-hmm.
stories.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and that's a really interesting point, that just raising the age creates more dramatic possibilities for a middle grade book, making her 12 instead of 9, which is very true. And often when writers want to turn true events into a book, especially if it's family stories, they're afraid to step away from writing it as it actually happened and add the plot twists or the drama or whatever they need to make good fiction. Um, and I've when I was editing, I would run across this a lot, and I would say to people, this, what you're writing about, is a really interesting incident.
Mhm.
It's not a story. To make it a story, you're going to have to add to it. Um, what do you say to writers who are facing this roadblock in telling their family stories, giving them, how do you feel comfortable stepping away from what actually happened and making a good story out of it without feeling like you're somehow betraying the family history?
Yeah, I think for me, because even though my book was inspired by my great grandmother, not solely based on her, I feel that I'm honoring her struggle and her memory and the sentiment that she had during the whole ordeal, and not only hers, but it's a universal struggle that's
Mhm.
not only unique to my great grandmother or even Mexicans crossing during the Mexican Revolution, but it's a universal struggle that's happened to any type of immigrant, whether they come to the United States or to Europe. And you feel that you're honoring them, and you're also honoring your family by sticking to that story, the one that your heart's wanting to tell. It might
Mhm.
have part of it, based on your family, but it's a more it's a deeper story that's just wanting to be told, that encompasses that universal struggle.
Well, sure. And that's really the key, I think, is finding that universal truth in the family story or in your own memory or whatever you're writing about, and using that as the basis, because that's really what's going to connect to
Mhm.
lots of different readers.
That's
And you did such a great job of that
oh,
with your book, for
thank
sure.
you.
So at the end of your book, there's an author's note, and I want to read a little passage from it that I really loved. You say, unfortunately, many stories like my great grandmother's or like Petra's remain in the shadows. How do we fix this? I believe we fix it with curiosity. We need to be curious. We need to look to our ancestors and ask questions. We need to listen to their stories, write them down on paper or on our hearts, and pass them on. By doing this, we bring stories of bravery, of humanity, and of great compassion to the light. And in turn, we learn more about ourselves and keep the bold spirits of our ancestors alive. And I really love that, because there are so many stories of ordinary people who have overcome tremendous obstacles, and we never hear about them in the history books.
Mhm.
History books, especially the textbooks, used in schools, tend to be focused on the famous and the infamous, and everybody who's in between kind of falls through the cracks. Now, I have to give it up to the writers of picture book biographies these days, because a lot of great stories of ordinary people are coming to light through picture book biographies, which is awesome. And
Mhm.
I'm hoping that that will start happening with middle grade, as even if it's turned into fiction, as you've done. Um, so this being curious, I think, is so important. And how can we sort of foster our curiosity, especially about our own family? Is it a matter of actually sitting down with our relatives and saying, tell me who you are, tell me about your childhood? Is that where we start?
Yeah, that's part of it right there. Trying to start a conversation, discussion, and a lot of times for me, it was just self-analyzing. Doing self-analysis on why do I act the way I act, where do I come from,
Mm.
my background, and it's amazing with the research I did for this book and on my family story, how much I learned about myself and who I am and why do I react to the world around me the way I do. And a lot of it's because of my background, my history, and
Yeah.
we don't realize how much of an impact that history has on us in the present time. And it's going to have that impact on the future as well. But if we realize that, I think we're able to guide the future generations through that history and say, hey, look, this is what happened to our ancestors in the past. And this is the way we are because of that. And now let's use that strength, let's use that wisdom and
Mhm.
put it to good and connect us all as well, because I think all of our histories, there's some universal truth and connection that makes us all human and connects us all. So I think that's what gets us together and lets us, reach that harmony that we're so desperate to seek for right now.
I think that's absolutely true. And that's so interesting that you find out so much more about yourself when you find out about your family history, because it's true, those things influence each generation and get passed down, whether it's a way of thinking, acting, reacting, the values you have, all of that. It's so true. And I noticed, Beth here in the chat box says, there are so many questions that I now wish I had asked my parents and grandparents, and now it's too late. So if you have those people in your lives, ask the questions, which is very true. And I would also say this: talk about your history to your kids, because the kids don't always know to ask the questions. But if you just start talking about it, like I know a tremendous amount about my mother-in-law because she loves talking about her childhood, where her parents came from, the family tree, that's her thing. I know a lot about that. I know not so much about my own mother's family because she didn't talk about it. And as I got older, I started asking her questions, but you don't always know the questions to ask. So I think it goes both ways. So we shouldn't be afraid to share our history either with people in our life.
Share it, and also and just have discussions about old stories, and even though it's amazing how many times we repeat stories or anecdotes at family reunions, but usually I've noticed that another story comes out, a new one sometimes, that, oh yeah, that reminds me of the story. And I was like, oh my goodness, I never heard that, all this time, every Christmas we talk about the same story, yet something new comes out. Or also, I met a second cousin too, one time, that had a lot more stories than I did. So I was amazed. I was like, oh my goodness. So obviously their parents probably passed more stories. So you could always reach out, laterally from family members and grab, get more stories like that. You put your detective hat and start, just chatting away. And usually, like one of my aunts, I have a great aunt, another one that claims she didn't remember anything, that she didn't know anything. Don't ask her, don't say anything. And but I would start telling her about a story that I knew, and before you knew it, she would just open her heart out and start telling her own stories. And she did remember it, but she just, I don't know if she was tired at the moment or didn't want to fuss with it. But she claimed she didn't remember anything, but at any given moment, she would. I was like, oh my goodness, this is, a whole book here.
Yeah, it's awesome. And you're right, cousins are great too, because you're of one generation, and they're going to have the same generational perspective you do, but they might have heard slightly different stories from their parents, and so you can put it all together. Yeah, that's great. So having inspiration for your plot and your protagonist is one thing, but you still had to learn how to write the book, just like everybody else. So what sort of things have you done to hone your craft, especially when you made that jump from picture book to middle grade? That's a very different kind of writing.
For me, it was, well, I took a lot of, like I said, I read a lot of great magazines out there, like your newsletter was wonderful. And then I did the Writer's Digest, that was incredible too. But I read a lot of middle grade books that were similar in theme. I read the Crispin by Avi. I must have read that, 40, 50 times. And I read Lois Lowry and similar books that had dark elements and historic periods, and just trying to learn how they did it, how they, the pacing and their way of doing flashbacks, everything. That's what I studied over and over, just trying to read and trying to just do what they did. They're the masters, and I try to, copy what the form and all that, try to learn my way. So yeah, some people say, what, you copied? But it's just metaphorically speaking.
No, that's great. That's what you need to do. You need to dissect those mentor texts and really figure out what they did and try to do it yourself. Absolutely. Now, Petra Luna is first person narration. You wrote in first person. Was that just sort of a natural choice for you, or was that difficult? I think writing in first person has its own set of challenges. So how did you handle that?
It's just because I've had different stories that I've worked on, and each one is different in terms of POV. And that one just came to me as first person, Petra wanting to tell her story. And I tried writing it in third, but it just wouldn't come easy. And so I figured, you know what, she's telling me to do this, so I'm going to follow her lead and let her talk, let her just take the stand and speak. Let her tell the story.
Yeah. No, and I can see how your grandmother might have been, or great grandmother might have been influencing that too, giving her a voice to tell the story as well, which is awesome. So the other side of the river, which is the sequel, continues Petraluna's story in her new home in the United States, and that comes out this next September. Is this also based on your family stories, or did you
Yeah.
just deviate completely?
Part of it does, and the book opens, book two, The Other Side of the River opens with Petroluna at the refugee camp, and which is the same refugee camp my great grandmother was in at Eagle Pass, Texas, back in 1913. So, and that's the way I started my picture book back in the day. That was the opening scene of the picture book of book two, the beginning of book two. But just like my great grandmother was there at the refugee camp, at one point after several weeks in the refugee camp, in the historical facts, and even my great grandmother told me the story as well, and it matched what I researched, that the immigration officers came to the camp and said that they were about to shut the camp. And refugees there had the option to either return to Mexico. Things had settled a little bit and it was safer now. So they had the option to return or stay in the United States, and they would be placed in a different type of work. They had work for them, for the immigrants that wanted to stay. And my great grandmother talked it over with her father because she was the oldest of the siblings, and her father decided to return to Mexico. They figured, you know what, that's her country. We have to rebuild her. So they went back, and they said it was a struggle. They got back, everything was burned to the ground, and they had to start from the bottom, just rebuilding Mexico. And it was really tough. But in Petraluna's story, or The Other Side of the River, I had read about so many immigrants that stayed and try to survive in the United States, and the whole culture shock and different languages. And I saw that as a challenge for Petra. I said, okay, what would happen to Petra had she stayed, here in the United States? And especially because San Antonio, the city I grew up in, 30,000 refugees ended up in San Antonio. So at that point, I said, in San Antonio being my city, I wanted to explore that, see what Petroluna how she would fend for herself in a new world now that she's in the city, not in a village in Mexico. And just, I let her go there, and she had a story already.
Wow, that's great. That's great. Yeah. And just you talking about your great grandmother and your great great grandfather returning to deciding to return to Mexico, the courage that must have taken and determination is just amazing. And that's part of your legacy too. So that's something I'm sure you're very proud of.
Yes, because now I know what happened to her life after she returned, the struggles. I mean, it wasn't easy, the year after year of struggles, and even for my grandmother, who was born after that. And I see the possibilities and the opportunities that she would have had she stayed in America. And it always made me wonder, okay, how would my life have been different had my great grandmother stayed here, and instead of me migrating here at a later age. So
yeah. Wow. Well, there's more books for you right there. So whenever people write about their own culture, I always get questions from writers saying, is it okay if I were to write about a culture not my own, and doing as much research as I could and try to authentically and accurately portray this culture? Is that okay? And there are different opinions on that right now in publishing. And I didn't know if you had an opinion on this issue that you wanted to share with us, knowing that everybody has their own opinion on it.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, everybody, there's a lot of opinions out there, and I respect them all. Everybody has a different upbringing and background, so they see things differently. But for me personally, I do see the benefit when you write outside your culture. I myself, I mean, I was a reluctant reader when I was a kid, and
Mhm.
it took a while. I think it was a love-hate relationship I had with English because it
Mhm.
was so difficult for me to learn it, and I was reluctant to read. I said, no, it's not for me. I love it, but at the same time, I don't love it, and I
Yeah.
refuse to read books. But the first book that I read from cover to cover, I was 16 years old, and it was Catcher in the Rye.
Hmm.
And that book just blew my mind. And I was just amazed that despite the character, Holden Caulfield, how he was, this yuppie kid from New England, from the Northeast, and I'm a Mexican kid from Southside San Antonio, struggling to make it. And yet I felt identified by that character, despite being so different, I was him, and I was like, oh my goodness, how did this writer, do this? What's this
Mhm.
magic? Because I,
Mhm.
I was that character. And it didn't matter if we looked different, we had different upbringings. That was me. I had that same angst as he did at
Mhm.
16. So I think it's beautiful, to identify with characters, but also write them, respectfully, if you do your research, your due diligence, and you respect that culture and do your best to do the research and write it, I think it's fine to me. Because once you get tied into writing your own culture, like for instance, for the next book, The Other Side of the River, I touch on the Irish culture a lot.
Hmm.
And I got to, when I was in the Air Force, I was working with five airmen that were from New England, and they're all Irish. So I was the only Mexican there. And before you knew it, I was talking like them. I was saying, most of them were from New England. So I was saying wicked smart and things like that, just to say very smart. And I met their families, celebrated St. Patty's Day with them. And it came to a point that sometimes I felt Irish just hanging out with them. And so
Huh.
it's just that beauty of embracing the culture. And I feel comfortable that, I learned, and I did a lot of research too for this coming book on the Irish culture and their background and whatnot, and saw the connection too with my own culture. And likewise, when I got stationed in Germany, I embraced that culture as well. And I do have ideas about writing from that culture because I embraced it and I lived in it, and I'm going to do the research. So I think if you embrace it and respectfully, like I said, do your due diligence and write, with that respect of that culture and trying to understand it and know. And yeah, I think it frees the mind and the creativity for us to explore other worlds and connects us more to them as well.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. It's a it's a question that everybody has a slightly different take on, and I think we have room for all opinions. So
Yeah, oh yeah,
thank you for sharing that.
definitely.
That's great. And I think that's so awesome that you were starting to talk with the Irish accent
Yeah, to this day,
and
every now and
the
then,
slang.
yeah,
That is so
yeah.
funny. All right. Well, before I get to a few questions from our viewers here, do you have any final advice for aspiring authors who want to mine their family for story ideas?
I'd say it's sad, like we were talking about, try to give one a relative a phone call and just try to get those stories, find out more about them. And the neat thing with my story, if I had date ranges too. So if you look at newspapers that were published in that era, in that town, which in the US, we're lucky we have so many resources that have those newspapers, you get so many ideas as to where they did their shopping, where they lived, and current events that were happening locally for them.
Mhm.
So that may trigger more stories during family reunions if you
Right.
mention that research. And because it happened with me, if I saw something that I brought it up to my mom, and my mom would say, you know what, that reminds me of this one story that, so you never know what
Yeah.
it's going to lead to. But yeah, we do, especially newspapers. That was probably one of my favorite resource for historical research. But
Hmm.
yeah, that's probably great for family stories, to reminding family stories. And ancestry.com. I didn't use it much, but I've heard that that's really, really helpful.
Great. Great. Okay, well, let's get to a few questions here. Terry's asking, and this is actually something I thought about. How do you avoid making family members embarrassed or maybe even angry by what you're writing about now? A lot of the people that you're used as inspiration, I assume, have passed.
Thank goodness,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you didn't have to worry quite as much. But you know, what do you say to that? How do you avoid making your family mad about writing about them?
No, I would say change your name or the character.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. No, something I've heard that if it's something negative or embarrassing, to ask that person first, or to not
Hmm.
put it down just because you do run the risk. That's what I've heard. I don't know if it's true or not, but
Hmm.
sometimes you could, you know, get certain traits from that person and apply them to a fiction character, which is something I did.
Sure.
Abuelita in Barefoot Dreams of Petroluna has a lot of traits of my mom that I don't know if my mom would be excited to read or not about, but I put them on the grandma and I said, you know what, and it's not all my mom, but part of it is my mom, part of it's my grandmother, part of it it's even me in there. So it's
Hmm.
a mesh. So a lot of it, if you find family members you want to write about, you know, and you do create the fiction, you could always put that certain trait to a fiction character, and
Hmm.
it could never be, you know, too obvious for them to say, oh my goodness, that is me, you know,
Yeah.
and they get upset. So I
Yeah.
would say that just
Plausible deniability. No, it's not
exactly.
you. Yeah, no, that's a very good good tip there. Uh, So Sheila, I'm just going to read what Sheila wrote here. She said, "This sounds wonderful, Alda. I'm wondering how and when you considered the genres instead of history, making it more fictional, or even if you might have gone totally fictional." So I think she's asking, did you ever consider making it straightforward as more nonfiction, you know, just telling the family story rather than fictionalizing it? And I know some of that we talked about a bit, making a, you know, plot, you know, serving
Mhm.
the story. But it's still a compelling story in and of itself if you stuck just to the truth as well.
Yeah, because my great grandmother would talk about just the basics. She wouldn't talk about all the details and nitty gritty stuff. So a lot of it, like they say, a lot of historical fiction are facts, but then you have to tie in those facts with fiction.
Mhm.
So that's the beauty of it, that you add the dramatization through those through that fiction. So I kind of see it, the way I view it myself is like these bricks that you're building this brick wall, and the bricks are your facts, and the mortar is that fiction that you're going to sustain the whole wall together with.
Right.
And so in order to hold the story together, you got to raise the stakes, you got to do different things that you can if it's just, or at least I couldn't do it through the pure facts. And a lot of it was because I didn't know what,
Mhm.
you know, she had gone through exactly. So a lot of it I had to use my imagination or of stories of other people that I read that went through that same ordeal. So,
Mhm.
but it's a challenge. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it is. Um, and I have another question here. Have you heard the term historical realistic fiction? Does it mean actual names and places may be used in writing, but dialogue is introduced, thus fiction? Um, I, I haven't specifically heard that term, historical realistic fiction, but yes, in historical fiction, you can use actual place names you want to, you know, dates, events that actually happen can be woven into the story as you did.
Mhm.
Were there any places that you created to serve your story, or is every place in the book real?
The town where Petroluna, her hometown, it's named after the town my grandmother was born in, but
Hmm.
and it's almost near that same area, but it's not necessarily a factual.
Mm.
Uh, you know, I researched that town itself just because I didn't know the village that my great grandmother had left. So I named the town that my grandmother was born in because she always spoke so fondly of it. And it also means hope, Esperanza.
Mm.
But so I just figured, well, I'll just do that, and I'll state it there in the fact or fiction. I have a fact or fiction document in my website where I say what is, what's not. And I figured, okay, it's just in that region near the mountains. And
Mhm.
I'd heard of several churches throughout in the area, but that one where they stop is not specific to any of them.
Mhm.
So, but I just added it to the story as well,
Sure.
and the routes that they walk through. But everything else, the border town, that was accurate. The crossing into Eagle Pass, that was accurate as well as the
Mhm.
dates. So when it gets closer to the climax, just because I was able to find all those facts on newspaper, that's when I was, just delighted to use those facts there.
Right.
And the other ones, I did as much research as I could, but unable to find solid facts, and I had to fictionalize some stuff.
Mhm. Great. Well, and it sounds like because you did so much research, if you did create something, it would be very authentic to what might have actually been there.
Yes.
It's which is another important part of doing that research, so you can create those things.
Yes.
This is an interesting question. Did your physics and engineering background end up playing any role or helping at all with your storytelling or research?
That's a great question. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Physics, yes, I think it helped a lot just because what I enjoyed studying the most was quantum physics, and anything in theoretical quantum physics, your imagination, you really have to use your imagination just because nothing is, that you could hold or you could see yourself. A lot of it is all, if you're talking about the subatomic world, it's got
Mhm.
to be all in your imagination. So yeah, you use your imagination a lot, and also you use math to explain theories.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of it you use your imagination as well in order to envision what's happening in the physics world, not necessarily mechanical, but also the quantum world. And but engineering was more, because it was civil engineering for me, so it was more hands-on, and I didn't. It was okay, but I didn't see that creativity as much. But physics, I do make that connection with art and physics and creativity. I
Mhm.
think, yeah, you're able to switch brain hemispheres a lot in physics, between left and
Sure.
right. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
great question.
Yeah, it is a good question. Um, Molly is asking, do you write in English and do you ever, so have these books been translated into Spanish
Not
or
yet. No,
Castellano? Not
it's
yet.
coming soon. Yeah, hopefully this year.
Okay.
Maybe
Yes.
I may do it. I'm not sure yet, but it'd be nice if I could do
That's
it. We'll
that's what
see.
I was going to ask, if you would do the translation, or they may, or at least read over whoever does the translation to make sure it's done well.
Yeah.
But at this point, do you do all your writing in English or do you sort of write in Spanish?
I do. I write in English, and just because I've noticed, like, I tried it in Spanish. I do have the ideas in Spanish, but when I write it in English, and just because of I don't know if it's the practice I have in the language now, that I've been through the
Hmm.
school system in English, and went to,
Right.
studied English in college and whatnot, that to the point that now I'm able to play with the words a lot easier in English than I am in Spanish. Though sometimes I do get ideas in Spanish, and I can't help it, but I have to write it down in Spanish just because I feel that it sounds better in Spanish.
Yeah.
But more, especially picture books, I have some picture books in mind, and those come to me in Spanish. I don't know why.
Oh.
But now for novels, usually it's in English, and I don't know if it's the single syllable words that dominate the English language more so than in Spanish. In Spanish, you have more multi-syllable words, and
Hmm.
I have a more of a struggle writing sentences with that. I need more practice with that. But I always admire, though, Mexican authors or Spanish-speaking authors who write these beautiful sentences with multi-syllable words, and it's
Hmm.
just incredible how they do that. But in English, it comes easier because of that single syllable, or
Right.
right,
Oh,
yeah,
I never thought
words.
of that. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I can see where picture books might come to you in Spanish though, because they're short and there's a certain rhythm to the
Yeah.
language. And if that's your native language, it might just sound better to your ear in Spanish.
In
I could see that.
Spanish, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Tell us about your school visits. So you do school presentations. Are you doing them virtually now for the most part?
I'm doing both right now, so it depends on the school, and
Mhm,
but they're basically the same right now, except one of them, in person. But I do a PowerPoint presentation. It's about 30 minutes where I show pictures of my ancestors and also research of pictures that I found in research that depict their homes or their lifestyles, the food they ate,
mhm,
and just the interactions, because my family was really poor, and just the interactions with the rich that they had. So I showed pictures of the rich and kind of do the story through visuals for the children, for the young readers, and let them see the situation, the social conditions that actually led to the Mexican Revolution. So I tied
mhm,
that in with my family story and with the book, with the novel as well. And I do have quizzes in here and there that make them think and reflect on why the Mexican Revolution came about.
hmm,
And at the end, or halfway, I show them the research, how I went about to verify the story. And then at the end, it's all about seeking your own stories, the importance of seeking your own stories. Not necessarily, like I said, you learn more about yourself, but also about history, how it repeats itself. And I have pictures that I found from the Mexican Revolution and pictures from a year ago or a few months ago that you look at them side by side and it's the same thing. It's the same
mhm.
border, the same crisis. You
Oh,
have refugee camps in both of them. You have
mhm,
smallpox in one and COVID in the other. And so it's just amazing the parallels we have from the
mhm.
past and the present. So that's why I try to encourage kids that history tends to repeat itself. So that's why we got to learn from these family stories, just to see these
Sure.
patterns and be better prepared for them.
Mhm. Well, that sounds like a wonderful school presentation. So can people go to your website and find out, like contact you for those? Okay,
Yes,
terrific.
yeah, my website, yeah, I have a special event information there, and yeah,
Mhm.
you can find stuff there. And if you have questions, I also have a contact form there, and you could ask anything or share a family story if you'd like.
Great, great. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. It's just been delightful talking to you, and I love your passion for sharing your family story and for inspiring other people to do the same thing. I think
No,
that's
no,
so
it's an honor to
wonderful.
be here. No, especially on the code. I saw a lot of people on the chat saying how cold it was back back where they're at, and you're.
Oh yeah.
So no, thank you for joining me in this chilly evening. It's
Yes,
nice and
yes.
warm here in Texas right now, but
Yes, it is. Yeah, you're in a warmer place. But yeah, no, this was wonderful. So thank you. And I'm so looking forward to seeing to the other side of the river. We have to wait till September, which is far too long, but I'm so glad that Petraluna's story will continue. So
oh no, if you want to, I do offer a newsletter, quarterly newsletter, and the one for the summer, I'm going to have an excerpt there.
oh
So
great.
you gotta sign up. You
Okay,
can read the first couple of chapters.
great. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us, and I will see you all in is it 2 weeks? I don't remember. The next social. You'll get the
Thank
notice. First and
you.
third Tuesday of the month. So, all right.
Thank
And
you
thank
so
you, Alda.
much.
Mhm. Great. Good night, everybody.
Night.